Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review. And in this video I'm going to review Madame X by Madonna. This is the newest album from one of the bigger and possibly one of the more legendary names in the whole pop industry, Madonna. Madonna is mostly known in the pop industry as a controversial figure. It had to be actually one of the very first controversial figures, coming with a massive sex appeal that would constantly portray in not only her songs and the lyrics, but also with some music video clips. Madonna was always managing for a very long time to pull the strings, and for a lot of people it would consider to be the queen of pop. And I'm one of those people that I can actually see myself agreeing with that statement. Even from back when I was younger, I would definitely see Madonna as one of the more appealing figures in the pop music sphere. From a genre that I was not that much into back in the day, Madonna was still one of those names that would really click with me. And after years passed by and I happened to listen to more of her works that she has done over the years, this appeal that I had from the albums of Madonna back in the day would just resonate as for today. And Madonna, in my opinion, has done some great works and has a constantly decent discography. And some of my favorite pop albums of all time, like a prime example for me is Confessions on the Dance Floor. I was in love with tracks like Hang Up and Jab from since I was a little kid. Madonna's input does not have to do that much with her voice, her singing, or her lyricism, but actually with the music and the word in the production of each single album. And in terms of music, yeah, Madonna had some really solid producers throughout lots of her albums, with the most important being Ray of Light, produced by William Orbit. Madonna, though, was one of those figures that would never do something really all that revolutionary as in terms of pushing mainstream and pop music forward, showing a new and unique sound. Madonna is mostly an artist that would just go with the flow, and this is something that is really apparent even with her later releases. Madonna would just stick with each single trend that has to do with each phase of pop music. On the 80s it would go to this disco pop direction. On the 90s and the 2000s we would see Madonna go to some of the more trashy sort of vibes with some dance floor music, and we also see that with some of her later releases Madonna would just stick to some trap and contemporary R&B music, something which is also really apparent with the album Madame X. What was the thing though back in the day was not whether or not Madonna was able to pull out something revolutionary or something that the world hasn't had before, but the point would be to just stick in a specific formula, go on with what's trendy at the moment, and just make a great album about it. However, since the release of Confessions of the Dance Floor, Madonna's sort of legacy as the queen of pop started to fade out. Lots of different pop artists emerged, especially in the 2010s, and Madonna would just keep on going with the trend. What's popping nowadays? It's popping trap. So it's no surprise that Madonna is going into a trap direction, and also some of the pop rap and R&B stuff. It's definitely not a bad thing by itself, but Madonna, who was one of the more controversial figures back in the 90s, where everyone would just talk about Madonna, she ended up making a Eurovision appearance this year and no one gave a shit about it. Madonna, though, even after all those years, still tries to have this sort of more edgy attitude and also still keep pushing her sex appeal. I like the whole look and the whole vibe of Madame X, her whole clothing, her fashion style, but this doesn't resonate all that well with the music, which at most times it happens to be really typical and generic. Now, I was really worried that this was going to be the worst thing Madonna would do over her entire discography, and that this album would just throw the legacy of a pretty decent discography so far from Madonna. And that was mostly because the singles, the teaser tracks out of this thing, were actually not that good. This had to be actually the weakest set of singles from every single Madonna album so far. The song Medellín featuring Maluma was a really typical and generic Latin pop sort of reggaeton song. Maluma was an artist that I haven't heard of before, and to be honest, I don't see anything special about his delivery at all. He's also featured on another track toward the end of the album, Bitch I'm Loca, which is one of the more energetic and dynamic moments out of the album, but it's such a basic and generic Latin pop song. Then it's the song Dark Ballet, which had some promising ideas. It's a bit of a mess in its structure, it goes to lots of different sounds and directions in just one song, but this whole preachy attitude, this delivery from Madonna, it's nothing all that special. Despite having a sort of eerie and dark atmosphere to it, it doesn't manage to just pull it throughout the entire song. Future featuring Quavo has some reggae vibes to it. It's also a really basic and generic song, with Quavo feeling the worst and the most unnecessary feature out of this entire thing. It's mostly just him throwing ad-libs to just lots of different portions of the song. He really doesn't deliver something, it just does the song even worse. Then is the song Crave with Swae, which is the most by the numbers trap rap song imaginable. Nothing all that exciting about it, neither with the production nor with the delivery of both Madonna and Swae. And then the album ends with the single Arise, which it was possibly the better one from the singles of this thing. At least it didn't have an obnoxious and unnecessary feature to it, and the instrumental was kind of decent. But yeah, still, with all of these tracks teasing towards this album, I was really disappointed. So it's actually a bit surprising that the whole final result is not actually all that bad. In my opinion, what are definitely the weakest moments about this album are actually the teaser tracks, the ones that were teasing towards the album. It was Madonna's direction trying to go into the most basic and the most trendy sound possible without offering anything sort of imaginative. It mostly felt just like a boring attempt at just trying to be trendy and just be on with the things. But actually, some of my favorite moments come to some of the deeper cuts on this thing. This album also is a big mess when it comes to the lots of different styles of music Madonna just puts in one single album, which is not something all that surprising. Madonna pretty much has done it with every single album she just put out, especially with the last ones. Albums like Hard Candy and Rebel Heart would have the sort of more banging standard pop tunes, but it would go to some more ballad stuff, art pop, electro house, R&B, and possibly Madame X is one of the more varied albums she has done in her entire discography. The issue, like I said, is that when it comes to some of the singles, it sounds really typical. It's actually the safest direction Madonna would choose. But in terms of the rest of the album, this one has so many different elements that could even go back to some of her 80s stuff, like with the song God Control, or also with the really catchy I Don't Search, I Find, which has some disco vibes to it. Then there are other songs that go to the more Latin pop side of things, but with others going to this more traditional Latin American music, and it doesn't come out as something all that corny or all that usual, but we actually have tracks like Batuka and Gostoso that go to these more traditional sounds and vibes, and they're actually well executed. The production on these songs is really good, and they end up also being two of my favorite songs out of this album, also having some really solid and varied structures. Then there are other songs with Eastern vibes to it, going to some elements that are reminiscent of traditional Arabic music. The track Killers Who Are Partying is a prime example of that, and it's one of my favorite moments of this album when it comes to this whole production, to this whole structure of this thing. It sounds beautiful, it sounds very well executed. One thing I would say is really weak about this album is actually the vocals. I think that this is the weakest album from Madonna when it comes to her whole vocal delivery. That though has mostly to do with this exaggerating use of autotune, which in most times is completely unnecessary in my opinion. Madonna still has some great vocal deliveries out of this thing, but the autotune just being put in every single song out of this album, it ruins the experience a little bit. There are some songs that would sound way better without that much exaggeration of autotune. Like, I would see myself enjoying tracks like Got Control, Batuka, Killers Who Are Partying way more if it wasn't for that much autotune. It feels unnecessary, especially on tracks like this. One thing I'm going to give about this album though is that even though Madonna, especially with this whole Madame X vibe, would seem that she would go to something more edgy, something more aggressive, this is actually possibly the most laid back and chill album she has ever done. This album was actually really chill and cool, and despite having some moments that, like I said, are by the numbers with some of the singles, it flowed really well as a whole thing. Like, the moments that could sound more hard hitting would be with the tracks Got Control, Bitch I'm Loca, and possibly with the song I Don't Search I Find. But they're not all that distracting, with the exception possibly of Bitch I'm Loca. This whole album actually flows really well, and it's kinda relaxing. It's a nice thing to have and play in the background. So yeah, in my opinion, this album manages to be better in some of the deep cuts. And there are also the tracks Crazy and Come Alive that are decent songs, but I didn't really care about them all that much. I thought they were a bit forgettable, but they were still not that big mess or just so basic like some of the teaser tracks from this thing, which, like I said, are basically the thing that keeps this whole album down for being something even better. But this album ended up being a pleasant surprise. I was expecting I would be way more disappointed with this album that I actually ended up being. Don't get me wrong though, this is still one of the worst albums from Madonna, but it's still not to the point where, like I said, I was worried that this whole consistently decent discography she has built up until this point would just go down with this release. Madonna's Madame X still manages to be a decent album in an overall decent, lengthy discography from one of the more legendary figures in the entire pop industry, going on for about 4 decades now. I don't know how much fans of Madonna are going to care about this album if it wasn't for some unnecessary horrid features, some really safe directions in some more trendy parts of pop music today, and if it wasn't for that much use of unnecessary autotune, we would be possibly talking about the better release from Madonna of this decade. It's pleasantly surprising that this album ended up being even better than what would I expect, but it definitely has some great elements to it. It's a very varied album, going to lots of different phases, having some great use of traditional parts from both Latin and Eastern music, and it's also really good for being chill and relaxing. So it's really unfortunate that this album had so many elements to it that could just feel really weak, because it was actually promising to deliver something even more. Still though, even if this album doesn't have the legacy from some of the old works of Madonna, I'm still glad that this album is not as disappointing as I was expecting it to be. I'm going to give Madame X a 6- out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.